help a lot with, what would it call, like portfolio operations?
Portfolio operations, which is used interchangeably with scaling.
Yeah, scaling, right? And that's the whole concept of the firm, right? It's like, helping companies that go through that growth phase, right? And structure themselves. And that would seem like that would be the easy part, right, of being a startup. You're like, oh, you have market fit and you have money. And yet, I've really been amazed at how many companies are really unable to scale up, right? And there's the typical like implosion stories, there's culture, there's, the costs go out of control. There's just so many companies that fail at that stage. And so I figured that, we talk about kind of maybe top 3 things that like companies do wrong. And talk about that a little bit. We can sit down, enjoy the water a little bit. So, what are some of the things you came up with, right? So what's your, let's start from number 3. What's number 3 thing you think people do wrong when trying to scale a startup?
Right, man, I think number 3 is when you're trying to scale a startup, it is, as you're developing your team, a lot of times people will hire for the exact same thing that they are. It's really easy and comfortable for them to work in that particular scenario. But what I tend to find is that those that hire outside of their own profile, both in terms of areas of expertise, knowledge, work style, work experience, tends to add more creativity, which is usually a catalyst to creativity within an organization. Versus if you look at organizations that hire for sameness, yes, they can drive laser focus within the organization, but you lose some of the creativity and you start putting on your blinders.
And there's some really big example. I mean, of course, there's a lot of talks these days about gender diversity and racial diversity and all that stuff. But I've also seen that, the type of person you hire, I've seen a lot of companies overhire engineers because, they have this strong engineering-centric culture and background. And even if they are business people, they want the business people to have this strong engineering background themselves. So, there's kind of that sameness is something that, or educational background. People are hiring a lot of people from, the top schools and East Coast type of mentality, and it's true that it does kind of create that sclerosis of sort, right? And I've seen that in startups where the company faces problems, and then if nobody from that monoculture has faced that problem before, then they're really unable to deal with it. Yeah, that's a big issue. So what's number 2?
Number 2, I would say, is because we're so focused on metrics, and I think that it's really important for people to start practicing, developing and practicing the metrics before they actually need them. A lot of the company, if you can imagine trying to figure out what you need to measure at the same time trying to measure and analyze it, that's really hard. But if you can actually take the time now to look around the corner and think about, hey, these are the metrics that I need to start measuring, and start doing it now while it's easy, when you get to the stage where it actually becomes critical for you to be able to report and to analyze and use the data to tell you what does this actually mean, it just becomes so much easier.
Yeah, and I think the way that I think about that a lot is a couple of different things. One is that I've seen companies optimize for the wrong metric, way too early, and because they don't really know what's going to affect their business. A lot of metricizing analytics in a company, to be honest, is just a lot of gut feeling, especially early on. And there aren't that many templates. Coming in, I thought they would be like, oh, there's this golden metric, and every company has to think about their funnel this way and do this and optimize for that. And there's so many blog posts on people that say like, if you're not tracking this variant of ARR, then you're doing it wrong. And it's really not the case. And it's true that you see those kind of scares kind of develop very, very quickly. I've seen that from there's a board meeting that goes bad. This metric isn't doing well, and now CEO is cracking down, and everybody has to work on this metric. And this metric ends up being the wrong thing to spend 6 months of your company, doing. So it's very important to kind of get that. To me, it's kind of like a language, right? It's kind of like picking up a language. You have to start kind of figuring out the concept and practicing.
You have to practice. You have to understand the concept and the context of how to use it before you actually need it. So when it comes time to it, you're not scrambling to try to figure out whether or not it's a good metric for you to be using. You actually know that beforehand.
Right. And so how long do you think that takes on average for a company? Are we talking days, weeks, months? Again, this is a generalization, but what's the frame of mind you think people should have in terms of testing out metrics and applying them?
I mean, the good thing with that data is that you can always back test data, right? I mean, you can set up what you think that data metric might be, and then run it back into history, right? We do that with a lot of our own companies. We take a look, we develop a metric, we say, hey, what does this tell us today? But also let's backdate this and sort of see what this tells us over the period of time, and how does that correlate with how the company has performed since then? Would we have made a different decision at this point if the number told us X versus Y?
Now it makes sense. And so you kind of, would argue for like doing a lot of collection of like all the basic, especially financial stuff, of course, but even like user data, metrics about what they use, churn, all that stuff, and then figuring out what to ask later on, over the years. That makes a lot of sense. So what would be the number one? Let's do like number one drum roll.
I think the number one drum roll would be, don't copy exactly what you did at your last company.
Right.
The copycat startup, it's difficult because the organization is different, the culture is different, the market is different than what you did at your last company. We actually just ran an SMB summit where we brought together 6 startups, all selling to SMBs, but all having very different go-to-market plans. One was competing in a very competitive market, but it was a version 2.0 making web conferencing better. And so their big challenge really was getting share of voice, and so branding and corporate marketing was very important for them. Others, for instance, they're developing a brand new technology that no one has ever seen before. Branding doesn't really help them. They have to go out there and actually evangelize and tell people what their solution does.
What it is,
And so their go-to-market looks completely different.
Yeah, but you're right, and it's kind of very interesting because there's a lot of copycatting, from one startup to another. But you're right, and I fall prey to this quite a bit, where I'm always like, well, at this company we did this, at Apigee we're doing that, so we should try it again, right? And it's very funny because there's also this trend I think in Silicon Valley. I don't know if you've seen this too, where like there's this phenomenon of the founder that built the same company over and over again. And so I have some friends who are like, we're like in the Web 1.0 era, we're like, oh, I'm going to do this. And then, in the Portal era, they did it again. And then the social era, they like try to do it again, et cetera. And they keep kind of doing the same idea. And, again, to the number 3 factor, they keep hiring kind of the same type of people and kind of rebuilding the same thing. And so that echo, I think, while it happens from one company to another, it's very striking that, founders fall prey to that and do it, like copy themselves over and over. So breaking that loop, how would you suggest that people break that loop?
I don't think that there's, and this is not to say that there aren't best practices that really should be adhered to, but again, they should be used in context with one another. Don't copy exactly what you were doing before, but take what you learned, what did work, what didn't work, and then use that in the context of your new company, use that in the context of the new market that you're going after, and understand, this worked here. Maybe I'll take that same idea, use the same principles, but I have to better understand how, what the outcomes and what the ramifications are going to be.
Like really maybe just ponder like, why did it work the first time, right?
It's more about the why versus the what you actually did.
And it's very funny because I think, a lot of conversation, like the culture here still like drives people to say like, oh, like content marketing worked great, and you should try content marketing, and never really kind of talking about the problem. There's a lot of trading the techniques and tools, and you should hire this consultant for SEO, and and so I kind of feel like it's undervalued, right? Not think about the silver bullet, but think about the actual underlying problem that people have to solve.
Exactly.
And again, this may sound trite, but like I can't believe how many times I've seen this. You've probably seen this, 200 times more than I have. But it really is a thing that people fall prey, like those 3 factors that people fall prey over and over. And I have to say that I can't think of a company that I've worked in or advised that hasn't fall prey to all 3 of those things.
At some point in time in their life cycle, they will fall prey to all 3 of them. And so the good entrepreneurs, the great entrepreneurs, are the ones that can actually use the data in context. They can actually hire for diversity within their organizations, and they can actually start thinking about what do I actually need to be measuring now in order to get the analytics for tomorrow.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's sneaky, right? And it sounds like a cliche, and it sounds like obviously I'm not doing this, obviously I'm not doing that, but again, like it happens to everyone. It's like one of those things. It's dangerous because it seems cliche and it seems like trite, and that's why people fall into that. But yeah, cool. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cheers.
Well, it was, I think we were kind of stumbling in the dark for a long time, trying to make a company. We had this idea that we were going to make a company, and it was our second company, actually. We had been working on Kiko, which is a web calendar that was like Google Calendar, but not as good, and came out, a month before Google Calendar came out. So we decided, hey, let's start another company. The only idea we had, we had a couple ideas, but the idea that Paul Graham was like willing to fund was us making our own reality TV show called Justin TV.